You know, usually when we talk about a corporate takeover, there's a pretty standard playbook.
Oh, absolutely.
Like a company buys up a majority share, they restructure the board, roll out this massive rebranding campaign, and eventually, the old company's logo is just scraped off the side of the building.
Right, because the market demands transparency in those situations. I
Exactly.
mean, investors, regulators, they all want to know exactly who holds the assets, who's liable for the debts, and, well, who is actually calling the shots day to day.
But then you step into the world of 18th century geopolitics and colonial expansion, and suddenly that entire playbook it's thrown out the window.
Yeah, completely discarded.
We're looking at a corporate landscape today that is, honestly, a masterclass in deliberate deception.
It is the absolute definition of institutional camouflage.
It really is. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled you're here. Today, we are cracking open this incredibly detailed historical record titled Grant of the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa, 1765.
Quite a title.
Right. But I have to tell you up front, this isn't just, dry, dusty history about ancient treaties. This is the blueprint of the ultimate ruthless corporate heist.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
We are talking about how a single corporation, the British East India Company, managed to swallow the entire tax revenues of three massive provinces, all while pretending, with a completely straight face, that they were just humble merchants trading textiles.
I mean, our mission today is to unravel what historians call the dual system of government.
The dual system.
Right, and this was a highly engineered, incredibly cynical system instituted by Lord Clive. It was designed specifically to extract just massive, unfathomable wealth from the Indian subcontinent while strategically hiding behind the literal and metaphorical mask of the local royalty.
So have you ever wondered how a company transitions from just, trading spices on the coast to literally ruling tens of millions of people and fielding its own standing army?
It's quite a pivot.
Grab your notepad because we're looking at the exact mechanics of how they pulled it off.
Yeah, and to understand this heist, we first need to look at the massive power vacuum that made it all possible in early 1765.
Right, because you can't just...
You can't execute a hostile takeover of this magnitude if the target is entirely stable.
Yeah.
You need chaos, or at least a significant transition of power, to slip your foot in the door.
Setting the scene for you all. It's May 1765. Lord Clive arrives in Calcutta for his second period as governor. And he comes in hot.
Very hot.
The historical records show he felt he had this strict mandate to cleanse the Augean stable of the company's recent administration because things had gotten incredibly messy over the previous few years.
Oh, completely out of hand.
The company's servants on the ground were basically running wild. They were extracting vast amounts of personal wealth, operating completely unchecked, and severely destabilizing the entire region in the process.
So Clive walks into a situation that is politically very fragile. But also, it's incredibly advantageous for a corporation looking to consolidate control.
Because of the leadership change.
Exactly. Just a few months prior to his arrival, in February 1765, the old Nawab of Bengal, Mir Jafar, had died.
And his son steps up to take the throne, this young man named Najmuddin.
Yes. And almost immediately, I mean, we're talking February 20th, while the new Nawab is still just securing his position, he is severely pressured into signing a brand new treaty with the company.
Wow. Barely even on the throne?
Barely. And through this treaty, the young Najmuddin essentially signs away the most vital elements of his sovereignty.
What does he actually give up specifically?
He formally confirms that the revenues of crucial wealthy districts like Burdwan, Midnapore, and Chittagong will go directly to the East India Company to defray the expenses of their troops.
But it's not just the military control and the land revenue he gives up, right? There's this incredible bit of internal structural meddling that happens next.
Well, the internal meddling is where it gets really interesting.
Because the new Nawab was highly dissatisfied with his own prime minister, a man named Mohammed Reza Khan, or Mohammed Reza Khan. The administrative notes from the time mention that this prime minister enjoyed, quote, uncontrolled authority over the local government.
Which is always a massive red flag for an occupying corporate force.
Right.
I mean, you never want a strong, independent executive running the local government because they might actually push back against your profit margins.
So Clive's select committee steps right into this internal drama. They decide they need to intentionally partition this ministerial influence so no one gets too big for their boots.
Divide and conquer.
Exactly. They force the prime minister to share power. They associate him with two other men of weight and character. Juggett-Seat, who is this vastly powerful local banker, and Roy de Lub.
Yeah, and they engineer this forced power-sharing agreement strictly to keep the local leaders in check.
To ensure no single native official can ever challenge the company's authority. Okay, let's unpack this for a second. This sounds exactly like a hostile corporate buyout where the acquiring company keeps the old CEO on the website just for PR
Yeah,
purposes.
that's a perfect analogy.
But secretly, they strip them of their actual security badge, their budget, and their access to the servers. They completely dilute his power by surrounding him with their own approved board members who report back to the new owners.
That is precisely the dynamic playing out in Bengal. And the underlying political philosophy Clive is operating under is what makes it so brilliantly sinister.
How so?
Well, Clive realized early on that a true division of power, where the Nawab actually retains genuine functional authority alongside the company, was completely impossible.
Because someone always wants to be in charge.
Exactly. Without generating constant friction and discontent, it just wouldn't work. Clive's own writings reveal his belief that all real power had to belong exclusively to either the Nawab or the company. There was no sustainable middle ground.
But taking that power outright, like raising the British flag and declaring ownership, was incredibly dangerous.
Too dangerous. So by systematically reducing the Nawab to a mere, quote, name and a shadow, Clive secured the company against future local revolutions.
Think about the psychology there. You can't overthrow the East India Company if you don't legally recognize that the company is the one in charge of the government.
Right. If the local populace is angry about taxes or oppression, their anger is naturally directed at the shadow Nawab.
The face on the coins?
Yes, the face on the coins, rather than the invisible corporate directors pulling the strings.
It's brilliant in a deeply cynical way. Which brings us to the actual mechanism of the heist itself.
The main event.
Right. Now that the Nawab is effectively sidelined and surrounded by company-approved managers, how did this corporation legally get its hands on the actual money without causing a massive international incident?
That brings us to August 12, 1765. This is really the absolute watershed moment in colonial history.
Okay.
The Mughal emperor, Shah Alam, formally grants the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa to the East India Company.
Just to clarify the terminology for everyone listening, the Diwani is essentially the office of the chief financial minister.
All right.
It means the company is now legally appointed as the official tax collector for these three massive, incredibly wealthy provinces. They completely control the treasury.
And the financials of this arrangement are staggering. I mean, according to the treaty, the young Nawab is put on a fixed allowance.
An allowance, like a kid.
Basically, he gets roughly 5.3 million Sikha rupees a year for what they call the support of the Nizamut.
Let's give that number some context, though. The Nizamut essentially means his dignity, his royal household expenses, and the minimal troops needed just for ceremonial show.
Yeah, just to keep up appearances.
And while 5.3 million Sikha rupees sounds like a massive fortune, and it was just a tiny fraction of the tens of millions of rupees these provinces actually generated.
And even out of that 5.3 million allowance, over 3.6 million is strictly designated just for those ceremonial troops.
Oh, wow. So he barely gets anything to actually govern with.
Crucially, even that troop expenditure was to be controlled by a specific official named in the treaty, not by the Nawab himself.
So he's on an allowance, and he doesn't even have signing authority over the majority of it.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the East India Company collects all the remaining tax revenue from tens of millions of people, sending the surplus straight into their corporate coffers.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Digging into the history, this entire arrangement, this Diwani grant, wasn't actually Lord Clive's original master plan.
No, the idea had actually been floating around the diplomatic channels for years.
Yeah, the Mughal emperor himself had actually suggested it back in 1758. And he brought it up again in 1761 and 1763.
He was pretty persistent.
He was basically begging the English to take over the tax collection because the region was so politically unstable. He just wanted to ensure his guaranteed cut of the revenues was securely sent back to the imperial capital in Delhi.
But Clive initially balked at the idea.
Right, we have a letter he wrote to William Pitt in 1759 stating clearly that such a large sovereignty might be an object too extensive for a mercantile company to handle.
It's a rare, remarkable moment of hesitation. A corporation realizing that taking over the sovereign tax rights of an entire empire might just be a little out of their operational scope.
But by 1765, he's changed his tune entirely. He engineers this dual system. And the metaphor Clive uses in his own correspondence to describe the setup is just chilling.
It really is.
He explicitly viewed this system as a mask. Historical accounts describe his philosophy by saying the English suck the orange dry, but he imagined that the skin and the pulp left behind on the table would serve to delude the other foreign guests in Bengal into the idea that the English had not as yet devoured everything worth eating.
I mean, it's one of the most evocative metaphors you'll find in colonial history. The orange itself is the vast wealth of Bengal. The juice is the tax revenue being siphoned off.
And the discarded skin and the pulp left on the table are the young Nawab and his completely hollowed-out administration. Let me push back on this strategy for a second, though. If the company is suddenly collecting millions of rupees, fielding a massive standing army, defending the regional borders, and calling all the shots,
Yeah.
wouldn't foreign rivals like the French, the Dutch, or the Danes immediately see through this orange skin? I mean, these were sophisticated global empires. They weren't stupid. They had to know who was actually pulling the strings in Calcutta.
Oh, absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger geopolitical picture, you're entirely right that the other European powers weren't blind. They knew perfectly well who was in charge.
So why bother with the mask?
Because Clive's strategy wasn't about fooling them into thinking the Nawab was actually powerful. It was about weaponizing diplomatic and legal friction.
Ah, okay.
Clive knew that openly declaring the company as the true sovereign-like throwing off the mask completely and raising the British flag would force those foreign nations to formally take umbrage.
Because if the British Crown or the British Company is officially declared the ruler of Bengal, the French and the Dutch have to legally contest it, or they have to negotiate entirely new trade treaties directly with Britain.
Yes. As long as the fiction of the Nawab sovereignty was officially maintained on paper, the French and Dutch had to continue paying their trade duties to what they pretended was still the Mughal administration.
Wow.
If the English collected those taxes in their own name, the rival European powers would complain to their home governments in Europe, potentially sparking another massive global war.
So the illusion of the Nawab's authority was a necessary legal fiction designed specifically to prevent international conflict.
Exactly. It trapped the other European powers in a bureaucratic loophole where they had to play along with the charade or risk war.
That is wild. It's weaponized bureaucracy on a global scale. So with this mask firmly in place, the company has the legal cover they need from other empires. Let's look at how this actually played out on the ground, because moving from high-level treaties in boardrooms to the reality of the people living in Bengal is where this gets incredibly dark.
It does. We see a massive, almost delusional disconnect between the company director sitting in London and the aggressive operations happening in India.
Yeah, the court of directors back in England had these wildly hypocritical expectations. They were absolutely thrilled about the influx of money, obviously, but the historical accounts note they imagined their servants in India should, and I quote, sit beneath the tree and let the ripe fruit tumble into their open mouths.
An astonishing phrase.
Yeah.
It perfectly captures their greed.
They are demanding the immense produce of the Indian people's labor, but they wanted to offer them absolutely zero protection against injustice or oppression in return.
Right. They essentially told their agents on the ground, collect the millions, but don't get involved in governing, don't spend our money maintaining the police, don't worry about funding the courts or the infrastructure, just send the money back to London.
Which is a functionally impossible demand.
Completely impossible. You cannot separate the massive extraction of wealth from the administration of the territory that generates that wealth.
Because when you attempt to do so, you create a catastrophic vacuum of accountability.
Yes. You dismantle the local systems of justice to get the money, but you refuse to build new systems to replace them.
And into that accountability vacuum steps a very specific, highly opportunistic type of company servant. The records heavily highlight the role of the resident at the Durbar.
The Durbar being the Nawab's royal court at Murshidabad.
Right. And Francis Sykes is the prime example we see here. This specific administrative position became unbelievably lucrative.
Oh, the resident at the Durbar was the absolute linchpin of the entire dual system. They stood directly between the hollowed-out local native administration and the profit-hungry agents of the company.
Sykes handled the actual disposal of the revenues. While the directors in London are preaching this hands-off approach to revenue collection, Sykes is making an absolute mind-boggling fortune for himself.
A massive fortune.
Beyond his official salary, he got a 2.5% commission on the collected revenues. He also received massive complimentary donations at the time of the Punia.
We should probably explain the Punia, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this wasn't just a casual meeting. The Punia was the major annual ceremonial settlement where the tax demands for the entire upcoming year were locked in.
So the local landholders would come to the court to agree on what they owed.
Exactly. And Sykes is sitting there at this vital ceremony, wielding immense power over these landholders and accepting huge complimentary donations just to grease the wheels of the tax system.
Unbelievable. On top of that, he had a huge sumptuary allowance to maintain his lavish residence. And he conducted his own private trade on an extensive scale, using his official power to crush any local competition.
And the crazy part is, the company actually had to institute that massive 2.5% commission on the provincial revenues to compensate their top officials for giving up their illicit shares in the inland salt trade.
Wait, really?
Yeah. It was effectively a massive corporate payout divided into shares for the governor, the select committee, and key figures like the resident. They had to bribe their own executives just to stop them from completely pillaging the internal economy of Bengal.
That's insane. The sheer volume of wealth we are talking about here is just hard to wrap your head around.
Right.
Look at the revenue growth recorded for just one specific area, the Burdwan district.
The numbers there are staggering.
In the period from 1760 to 1761, the net revenues collected were just over 600,000 rupees. Fast forward just 8 years to the 1768-1769 period, the net revenues jumped to over 4.1 million rupees.
A nearly seven-fold increase in less than a single decade.
Right. And that staggering jump is not because the agricultural land suddenly became 7 times more productive, or because the company introduced some miraculous new farming technology.
Not at all. It's because the company became 7 times more brutally efficient at squeezing the local population.
They optimized the tax collection without providing a single public service in return. You know, this is remarkably like modern tech platforms wanting all the ad revenue from user-generated content, but legally claiming they have zero responsibility for moderating any of the actual toxic behavior on the site.
Oh, that is a very apt parallel.
They want the massive upside of the network effect and the cash flow, but they completely reject the civic responsibility of being a publisher.
A desire for total financial benefit with zero social liability. And this raises an important point about the nature of the select committee itself on the ground.
Right, because London is saying one thing,
And Calcutta is doing another. While the directors in England were writing these stern letters insisting on non-intervention, Clive's select committee was practically running the entire country government from the shadows.
they weren't just sitting under a tree waiting for fruit to drop.
No, they took over supreme military operations. They actively negotiated international treaties. They dictated exactly who the Nawab's ministers would be. They even started reviewing local criminal justice cases whenever it suited their revenue interests.
So the Select Committee essentially became the sovereign power, completely bypassing both the native Nawab and their own corporate bosses back in London.
Completely.
So what does this all mean when we put the pieces together? Let's synthesize this incredible shift that occurred by the end of 1765. The East India Company had achieved this compounding 5-point stronghold that cemented their absolute dominance over the region.
It was a perfect storm of control.
Let's trace how these pieces locked together. First, they acquired the absolute right to defend these 3 massive provinces by military force. They controlled the only army that mattered.
And building on that military dominance, their geographical home base was completely secure. Calcutta was held in free tenure, and they held the position of Zamindar in the adjacent 24 Parganas.
And a zamindar was essentially a feudal landlord with absolute tax collection and local judicial powers.
Right, so their headquarters was legally untouchable.
From that secure base, they expanded their direct control. In what were called the ceded districts, Burdwan, Chittagong, and Midnapur, they didn't even bother wearing the mask. They had direct, overt management of the revenues and administered every single function of government except high-level criminal justice.
But for the vast remainder of Bengal, they operated behind the mask as the official Diwan.
Right.
And because the current Nawab was a minor, they easily appointed their own preferred deputy to run his affairs. Every matter of administrative importance ultimately came before their own resident at the Durbar for the final decision.
Which leads to the ultimate corporate victory. As the Diwan, they controlled and collected all the customs duties. Their commercial supremacy was now beyond all question.
Total monopoly.
Think about it. No rival merchant, whether local or European, can possibly compete in a market against a merchant who also happens to be the one collecting the taxes.
It is breathtaking in its scope. I mean, they locked down the military, secured their real estate, rewrote the tax code, infiltrated the local judiciary, and completely eliminated market competition in one compounding sweep.
It really is.
And this is exactly why this historical deep dive matters to you today. The dual system of 1765 perfectly illustrates the profound danger of any system where financial extraction is completely divorced from civic responsibility.
Yeah.
When a corporate entity is allowed to wield the coercive power of a state,
Mhm.
collecting revenues and fielding armies, but it retains the singular ruthless profit motive of a corporation, the inevitable result is the devastating squeezing of the population. It is a historical warning about unchecked corporate power operating under the guise of state authority.
They sucked the orange dry and left the skin on the table to fool the neighbor.
Well put.
And that leaves you with a final idea to chew on as you go about your day. If Lord Clive's East India Company could successfully rule tens of millions of people, extract unimaginable wealth, and outmaneuver global empires simply by hiding behind the mask of a shadow government,
Hmm.
when you look at the complex lobbying, the impenetrable offshore tax structures, and the massive political influence of today's multinational megacorporations, you have to ask yourself, in the modern world, who is actually wearing the mask?
Specific mechanisms and treaties may have evolved over the centuries, but the underlying playbook of institutional camouflage is very much alive.
We'll leave you to think about that one.
Yeah.
Because once you see a hostile corporate buyout of a nation for what it really is, you just can't unsee it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.